Welcome to the Mum CEO podcast. I'm your host, Esther Roach. Join me as we explore the dynamic intersection of motherhood and entrepreneurship. From the challenges to the triumphs, we're here to unravel it all. Get ready for insightful conversations, practical wisdom, and a whole lot of inspiration. Let's embark on this empowering journey together. Welcome to the Mum CEO podcast. I'm your host, Esther Roach, and today I'm joined by Suzy. Hello, Suzy, and welcome to the show.
Oh, hello. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. For the benefit of the audience, please could you introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure, of course. So my name is Suzy Peach and I am a GP. I live and work in Scotland by beautiful Loch Lomond. As well as being a GP, I have recently started a business with my husband called Peach Wellness Academy. And the idea behind PWA came to me probably about 8 years ago. And I was sitting in clinic every day and realised that I was seeing an awful lot of young people, disproportionate amounts of young people, because generally speaking, they're not the sickest group. And I audited that and found that it was right. It was over 50% of my consultations were with under 25s. And also the things that they were coming in with weren't necessarily what I would see as big medical problems, but they carried with them so much anxiety in general, but also health anxiety. And I don't really see that as much in other generations. So I started to wonder why that was. Also, I noticed that some of the ideas they were coming in were very particular. So again, they come in with absolutely convinced they would have a particular diagnosis, but wouldn't really understand much more around it. Mm-hmm. And then I thought this has to be driven, clearly there's a lack of health literacy. So, baseline health knowledge. And then exposure to the internet. Obviously, we've got so much information out there, but you can go down a rabbit hole and only really read one particular thing. And I think that's where a lot of these problems were coming from. So I found myself on a day-to-day basis repeating the same things quite often, telling people the real basics of your mind, for example. What is that? What makes up your thoughts, your emotions, how these are reactive. When life is stressful, you feel more stressed, and that's okay. And, talking them through the basics. And that's where the idea started. I thought it would be wonderful if we could take a group of doctors into schools and deliver workshops on everything that's relevant for young people, mental health literacy, sexual health, skin, whatever it may be that's relevant for them, bring our expertise to them so that they have a good ground foundational knowledge of their minds and bodies, so that when they do see this stuff in social media, they can place it a little bit better, critically appraise it a little bit better. So that's where it started. And the idea has grown since then. The schools have said to us that, they'd love the workshops, but they much prefer, the problem is it's a one-off intervention. So they prefer something that they can tap into whenever it's needed for young people. Right. So the idea has grown arms and legs since then. And honestly, it started with just an idea that I never thought I would ever pursue. And it was during my second maternity leave. So I also am a mum, obviously, being on your podcast. And prior to having my children, my work-life balance was good because you could still work a lot and still have a good work-life balance. But having your kids just changes. I mean, it's such a cliche, isn't it? But it really does change everything. Your perspective changes, your time changes. I had my boy in the COVID pandemic, so we were quite isolated. And a lot of people often say, oh, that must have been awful, that must have been really hard. I actually think it was quite nice. Because that sounds terrible. It was my firstborn, so we love where we live. We live quite rurally. It's very much, we're in nature. We're beside a forest and hills and mountains and things. So I could be in that space with my baby and truly be able to be with him and relax and nurture that. And if I wanted to spend all day on the couch with my boobs out trying to breastfeed, I didn't have to worry that someone was going to stumble upon me. I didn't have to, there was no pressure to be at groups or to be socializing or having visitors. It was very calm and peaceful. And then I had my second daughter just 20 months later, my second kid, who's a girl. And it was during my second mat leave with her. We did a lot of walking, just strapped her in, put the toddler in the pram and just walked for hours every day with the dog. And I started to dread going back to work. And I don't know why that was, because I genuinely do love being a GP. I think it was more, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And I felt I was starting to sacrifice time with my kids a little bit. There were concerns because it's quite long days in general practice. People think it's 9 to 5, but it's not. It's a lot more than that. And the problem is the unpredictable nature of it. So even if you're on to finish at 6, if someone phones with an emergency at 5:45, you have to deal with it. So you might not make the nursery pickup. And it was these kind of things that I started thinking, this is not really what I want for me and my family. And this dream had been niggling away in the back of my mind about making a bigger change for more people, for young people. And my husband actually just said to me one day, it was only about 2 weeks before I was due to go back to work. And he said, you know, that idea that you have about the teens and improving health literacy and giving them a really proactive resource, do you want to do that? And I said, well, yeah. But I just never thought that we actually would. Yeah. And he said, I really think we need to give this some thought and we need to do it. And the week before I went back to work, we went on a small holiday in Scotland. We just had a lot of walks on the beach and a lot of quiet time, and we had a lot of conversations about it. And honestly, within that week, things changed where I thought this actually could really be possible for us. And it was my idea initially, and it was me that came up with all the ideas, but it was him that pushed me, I think. And it was just the right time, you know, having that time off. Yeah, it's hectic in the early stages with a newborn and a toddler, but you have a lot of free thinking time. You know, your days can feel very, very long. The nights can feel long. You're up in the middle of the night feeding. My brain was very active. So I had the time to be able to kind of reflect and realize what that meant to me. And it really, I don't know how to define it. This all sounds a bit wishy-washy now, doesn't it? But something changed in that second maternity leave that made me realize this is it. I knew I wasn't going to have more kids. So I thought, this is it. You're going back to this job for the rest of your life. And it was one of those, you know, a mirror was being held up to me and I realized I don't actually want that for the rest of my life. I want to do something different, something bigger. So wow. I've warbled on a lot here. Sorry.
That's absolutely fine. And it's, you know, there's so much I could be asking in there because, you know, one, you've got the support from your husband, which is really nice that you had that support, that encouragement where you've actually taken, you know, things from an idea to setting up a business. But what that shows as well is that you have this communication, which I always talk about how important communication is, because if he didn't know what you were thinking or what you're hoping to achieve, he wouldn't have been able to sort of say, you know, go back and look at your idea. So you'd have no idea. But you've also mentioned things about just walking, because sometimes I think when you look at the whole wellness thing, people think they need to spend so much money at personal trainers, pay for, you know, X, Y, and Z, left, right, and center. But you were just walking and you know, just being in nature.
That's it.
And that's it. Just being in nature. You don't pay for being in nature. But I feel, you know, I'm a mum of 5 myself. And I completely feel like sometimes it's very easy to not have that balance or not have that time where you just go in nature and just relax, because I do a lot when I'm outside. I love growing things. I've got an allotment and that is like, you know, most people will ask me, how do you get the time when you have 5 kids? But how important is that, just being in nature, you know, from your own experience?
Oh, yeah, it's everything to me. It still is. I mean, it feels like a reset button whenever I go for a walk. And I agree with what you're saying about it doesn't cost anything, because obviously the wellness industry is massive, right? And there's a lot of this expectation that, yeah, you have to be paying for expensive supplements, you have to be paying for expensive exercise, and it's not true. And we need to kind of go back to basics a little bit more. As humans, we're meant to be in nature, you know, and I feel in recent years I'm able to tap into my intuition a lot more. And I know when I've spent too much time indoors, I know when I've spent too much time in front of a computer, and I just have to go and be outside. And I do feel every single time so much better. That's an everyday thing for me. Yesterday, for example, I was feeling quite overwhelmed with the enormous, task that is the next couple of weeks for us gearing up to launch. And I was sort of all over the place in the morning and didn't feel very productive, and I was getting worried and anxious about that because I thought, well, I got to just sit here more and do more. And then I thought, nope, I'm going out for a walk. So I took myself off for only 40 minutes, but it was enough just to breathe and be away and come back, reset. And reset is the perfect word to describe that. And yeah, that is most of what, again, because I had my maternity leaves in lockdown, there wasn't a lot to do. So that was the thing that I did a lot of. And it was lovely. And I think it made it much more peaceful than it may otherwise have been, and definitely allowed me the time to reflect. I get most of my ideas now about content, where we're going to deliver new modules and new sections when I'm on a walk or a run. I do run as well, but less frequently. That's where the ideas tend to come to me, because you're away from the devices, you're away from the distraction, and you can truly listen to yourself, and you're just more mindful, aren't you? You notice things around you more when everything else is stripped away.
Yeah, no,
I'm not sure if that even answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did. And it has perfectly, because, what sort of advice would you give to somebody else? Because we've got, obviously, I've got a bit of, my background is in the dental field. And then
Sure.
I have a skincare brand. So you spoke about skin and all that, and I know the pain on social media and what you see and stuff. But when you look at like just the social differences that we have, people live in different spaces. Some people are in a flat, they don't have the, that luxury of having a garden. What sort of advice would you have for somebody who's thinking, well, it's okay for you because you've got all that green land and nature. I don't. What can I do?
That's true. And I don't want to anyone to feel like I'm showing off about that. I am so grateful for where I live, because that suits me. It's not for everyone though. And I don't know if that's appropriate for I think that I need nature to feel better and to feel calmer and more reset. That's not necessarily the case for everyone. But I do believe that as humans, we benefit from natural light on our skin, especially in the mornings. We benefit from fresh air. That's true of everyone, whether you notice it or not. And yeah, you might not have a garden, but you probably will have a park somewhere nearby. And even if you don't, walking along the streets is also good. You're still going to you're exposed to more fresh air, more natural light. And these are all things that help with your circadian rhythm, your internal hormone regulation. So it might not be the absolute ideal, idyllic, relaxing forest walk, but you can still get a bit of that just by moving outside of your home every now and then.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And in terms of, what can, well, there's a lot to unpick, but maybe I'll leave that one, because like we said, we're going to talk about some things probably in quite a few smaller episodes. But what I want to tap into now is, obviously with the business, you have started it with your husband. How has that been? How has that evolved?
No, I'm joking, but it's actually been great. I mean, Chris and I met as junior doctors in our very first jobs. So we met and worked alongside each other. So I knew him as a work colleague before we were friends, and then obviously in a relationship and married. And we always joke about, I remember when we first started dating, and he said to me one day, I can't remember where we were, but I remember the conversation, and he said, you know what, you're really different outside of work from inside work. I said, what do you mean? He's like, well, you're a lot more kind of free-spirited and scatty, I think is what he said, outside of work. And I said, yeah, because for me I'm very efficient in work, and I have to switch off from that. I find that harder in business work, and I'll come to that in a moment. But, in the medical world, you were constantly in hospitals jumping from one thing to the next, or in a general practice setting, you're seeing 30, 40, 50 people a day. So you've got to be very efficient constantly. And I think to protect my sanity, I just got really good at that. I've left that building, so that stays there. the odd person would creep into your mind that you would worry about, but generally you can't function like that all the time. You'd completely burn out. So I almost go the opposite way, and I just get a bit decision fatigue. I don't know what I'm going to watch on TV. What are we going to eat for dinner? I can't cope with that. And it was just the contrast for him was quite funny. So we've always known what it's been like to work with each other. And then we had a huge period of time where we didn't work together because we worked in different specialties. So coming back together has been funny after all those years of developing as professionals. We're very different people. So Chris is, I am much more, I don't think I have ADHD, but I have those types of tendencies. I can jump between tasks and I do get distracted. It makes me very good at managing lots of little things, but I could not sit and spend the whole day preparing the business plan, for example. So he would be very, very good at doing a task that requires a lot of in-depth work to get to the bottom of, he's good at. And actually, that's kind of why it works, because there's certain things that I'm better at and certain things that he's better at. Yeah. So it's been interesting. And I think the hardest part going into business is the bleeding into your personal life. And because at the moment, everything in our relationship is intertwined, you know, our relationship for a start, the children and being parents, and then, you know, the business now too. It's difficult to switch off from that because, you know, when we have time away, you know what it's like when you're starting a business. Your brain is constant. I mean, the ideas are insane. You wake up in the middle of the night and I'll think of something, and it doesn't stop. And what you normally want to do in life is share your thoughts with your partner. And there was a time a couple of months ago where it was a Saturday night and I was feeling again quite overwhelmed at this particular point. I thought, all I want to do is just watch some nonsense on TV. And Chris started chatting about an idea that he had that he was so excited about, and it was really enthusiastic. And I had to say, I said, look, I know, I hear you, and that's great, but I can't actually take this on right now. So it's that awareness that where you are in your headspace at that particular time, your partner might not need, and vice versa. So we could spend our whole day talking about the business, and that's not healthy and it's not sustainable. So we're actively trying to kind of proportion parts of the day to not talk about things. Or if we do bring it up, we bring up more the kind of fun, superficial stuff, and we don't go into a deep dive of, oh God, what are we going to do about that thing? Or how's that ever going to work out? Because that just causes stress at times when you don't need it. The one thing I'd say, aside from our relationship, I often think this journey would have been a lot easier if I'd done it before I had kids. But the kids are really protective of me, I think. So the weekend, I don't work when I have the children. So during the day and the weekends, no way. I wouldn't even touch the computer. I might, while they're doing something, I might quickly look in case there's been an email. Generally, there hasn't because it's the weekend. But that is it, because that my time with them is so, I'm not willing to compromise on that. I already had in medical life, so I'm not doing that again. And my time with them is really, really precious. And they're protecting us from overworking at the moment, I think, which is really good. You know, at other times I get frustrated if I don't have childcare and I think, oh, I've got this deadline and I really need to do this thing. But I have to check myself and say, you know, they're only little ones. You only get this chance once. And ultimately, being a mum is more important than any of the other stuff for me. So it's just trying to get that balance. And I don't know if that is, I mean, you're a mum to 5, so you'll know even more. But, you know, I don't think that's a thought that ever leaves a mum's mind. You know, we always worry that we're not doing enough in work or we're not doing enough for the kids. And I think that balance, actually getting that balance and maintaining it, is probably impossible. There's times where you give a little bit too much, but it's trying to be kind to yourself and not feel guilty about that. I think that's important.
No, absolutely. And, you know, it's about boundaries, isn't it? Sort of having some boundaries, and there's certain things that are non-negotiable that personally I have, and I think it's important to have that. But what would you say to somebody else who's sort of stuck in between and suffering from mum guilt, but then they have this idea that they want to follow, or they have this career progression that they want to chase? You know, what would you say?
I saw a video online recently, you might have seen this already, about the kind of glass ball analogy. So as a working mum, you are juggling bowls every day, and some are glass and some are plastic. And my first thought when I read this, when I heard about it, was, well, obviously they're implying that the glass bowls are your family, because when they break, that's, you can't do anything about that, whereas plastic bowls. So, but actually it described it a bit better. It said, well, some of your work balls are plastic and some are glass. You have to make sure there's money coming in, otherwise you can't live. So that's a glass ball. Some of your family balls are glass, their health and their well-being and nurturing them. Some are plastic. Does it matter if you don't, get the odd socks day memo from school? Does it matter if you don't go to the mum's meetup? No, actually, some of those things don't matter. And when you're starting a business, I think you just have to kind of, in my mind, I'm constantly triaging what's important. That thing can wait. That thing needs my time and is an absolute non-negotiable for me. I forgot what your question was.
It was to do with boundaries, and obviously, just sort of what is your advice to other people that are trying to kind of chase and have this guilt?
That was it.
Yeah.
I think the mum guilt is something that we have to just all get more comfortable with and actually normalize it, because I think that is a completely normal feeling. We are built, when we're mums, our instinct is everything is about the child. But actually, the way that I think about it is, I'm raising people. They're not just babies, they're just children. I want them to be really good adults, and showing them that they have a parent or guardian that's driven to make their life better, I think is good. If every time they said to me, "Oh, mummy, I don't want you to work today," if I said, "Okay," and just spent it with them, I'd probably be raising spoiled brats for a start. So they are kind of learning the boundaries of that. And I think it's good for them to learn that we're driven and we have ambition. And the same for me, a non-negotiable is exercise. So with the walks outdoors, but I also have a couple of days of the week where I go to a gym class full of amazing other mums, actually, and the women who set it up realised how difficult it was to maintain your fitness as a mum, so she set the gym up, and they have a little creche in the corner. You can bring your kids no matter what age they are. So I take my kids once or twice a week with me, because it's usually on a day where I have the kids, so a Saturday and a Wednesday, and they enjoy it for a start, because there's other kids there, there's new toys, it's good fun for them. But they do see me investing in myself and exercising, and I just think it's good for them to see positive habits. And kids just like being around you no matter what you're doing. So you can try, what I've realized now, which I didn't realize when I had my firstborn, is they just like, I've emptied the dishwasher, and they just want to help that. That's as fun to them as sitting down and doing crafting, for example, an actual dedicated task that I'm supposed to do because I'm a good mum. So I think showing them that you are doing something that's good and you're looking after you, and you're doing something that's creating a better future for them and ultimately making them a better person. That's what I tell myself to try and alleviate that guilt when it sometimes creeps in.
No, and that's a really good way of looking at it, because children learn from the people around them. They see certain things every time, and that's what they pick up as they get older. I wanted to touch on, have you had to make some sacrifices, obviously, along the way with setting up a business? I know you did with your in your medical profession, but have you had to do the same with setting up the business, and what does that look like for you?
Sure. So the medical one's the big one. So I left my GP partnership 18 months ago, which was a huge blow for me in a way. It was really difficult, mixed feelings, because I knew I wanted to do this, but ultimately I love my job. The partnership that I was in was fantastic. That practice was so good. The staff were great. I still have so much respect and love for them. So that was really difficult for me to walk away from, especially when the future is unknown. Now, I do still work as a GP, just much less, and I work on a locum basis, so I can pick and choose where I'm working, when I'm working. It fits better with what I'm doing at the moment. And the other sacrifice that comes with that is stability. I mean, obviously, financially, you're worrying about, there usually is always work, but, what if it dries up? What if suddenly I need shifts and they're not available anymore? So it's the safety net was taken away there. I think you need that to make progress in a business anyway, to be honest. You need to be a bit anxious on edge to just drive yourself forwards. Other sacrifices, I do feel, I know I'm just saying that we're protective of the time with the kids, but I do feel like we're sacrificing a little bit, because things like, we've not had time off this year, apart from the weekends, we've not taken extra time off. We've not gone away anywhere. We've not just had fun days at home, extra days. So little things like that are making a difference. And then, with the startup journey, you're ploughing a lot of your finances into it too. So you have to be careful with the decisions that you make and these small sacrifices along the way. But as a whole, I generally live quite a simple life. So I can still maintain my time outside, my time with the kids best I can. I still feel like I've maintained a bit of balance, but definitely more of me has been given to the business than I would like at this moment in time. But I think that's just the way it has to be when you're trying to do something big and you're in the early kind of thick of it stages.
Yeah. And it does take a while to, for everything to kind of settle in. But I like the fact that, with sometimes with starting a business, I think people overlook, because it's always like, oh, I want to work for myself and stuff, but they don't realize, you've obviously looked at even the financial stability and all those things. And it's one area that's really important. Sometimes you've got to do something else on the side to still bring in some kind of money, because
of course.
I feel like, I worked self-employed for so long, for so many years, but I think most people that work self-employed, they probably have the most discipline, because one, you don't have holiday pay, you don't have all those safety net things that you can kind of think about. So you've got to be a bit more careful, isn't it, in your planning and how you do it.
That's it. You do. Yeah. And your time with the kids, things like suddenly, we've got summer holidays coming up, and I haven't really thought about that. What does that mean? When am I going to work? It's just all a bit. Thankfully, my parents have offered to take on a lot of that burden, which is incredible. And again, so grateful for that, because so many people don't have that. But yeah, it makes you have to think that little bit more